Hi there, Megan Thompson with Megan Thompson Coaching, and today we're going to cover when you feel like you're parenting with a third wheel involved, and that is the nitpicking your spouse is doing or your co-parent is doing when your sensitive kid and you and your family are stuck in the meltdown cycle. Let's make sure that we know what we're talking about here. In parenting a sensitive child, a highly sensitive child or teen, and being stuck in the meltdown cycle, what that means is that your sensitive kid could be hitting, kicking, running away, shutting down. Your teenager could be telling you that it doesn't matter anyways, and they're better off just staying in their bed, staying in their room, closed doors, isolating on their phone, etc. And when you're parenting with a partner, a co-parent, right, whether that be spouse or partner or what have you, it can be incredibly difficult to stay on the same page. So we're going to cover that today. Now, here at MTC, how do we know what we're doing, right? And this is important for us to cover. I've been helping parents of sensitive kids break out of the meltdown cycle for over a decade now, and we've been doing this exclusively for many, many years. And we help parents do that in as little as 8 weeks. Now, how do I know what we're talking about? More than just the results that we've been providing for years with families and their work. Their work is what makes it happen in their home. Well, my team and I each respectively have over a decade worth of experience in our fields. So for me particularly, my field is mental health. I'm a licensed clinical professional counselor and registered play therapist supervisor. And that's the mental health industry's credentials. But in this capacity, I'm here as a parent coach and consultant, and we help parents around the world. So, and these are parents of children ages 2 all the way up through 18. Now, we work with teenagers in high school alongside their parents, but for 8th graders and under, we work with parents only because the research on highly sensitive kids demonstrates consistently that you as a parent are your child's change agent. And that is incredibly important for you to know and to anchor in, because when you're parenting a sensitive kid, you can be listening to any Tom, Dick, and Harry about what could be helpful for parenting an emotionally aware child. But it's very important that you follow people who know what they're talking about in terms of parenting a highly sensitive child. And high sensitivity is a personality trait that's found in over 20% of the population. That means 1 in every 5, okay? And so that means that if you're a family of 5, you might have a highly sensitive kid in your family. Might mean that you have a family with 3 people, or all 5 of you could be highly sensitive. This isn't a cut and dry statistic in the sense that the odds are even. That's not how statistics work, right? So let's get diving into the challenges that we here at MTC solve. So all of our professionals and the team, and every team member that we work with serves the entire family that we work in the families that we work with. They all have at least a decade's worth of experience in either occupational therapy, neuroscience, mental health, like myself, education components to that as well. And so we've been doing this for a long time in other avenues and in the coaching component too. So we've been around the block, if you will. And when we think about why one of the things that you need to be focusing on is how both you and your spouse need to be able to work on the same page is so important. One thing that we hear from parents often is that one parent can be paying attention to the small details that your child needs to be focusing on, their behavior that they need to be focusing on. And then another parent can be looking at the bigger picture. And this can be very common. And so that's what we're going to talk about today, is how to look at the big picture and focus on the details in a way that actually moves the needle, breaks you out of that daily shutdown cycle as well, without overwhelming your child or your whole family, because that's a lot to keep track of, right? So let's focus on this. Now, we know for sure it is not developmentally appropriate for any child over the age of 4 to be having daily meltdowns. And it's incredibly exhausting and draining for children under the age of 4 to be having daily meltdowns that last longer than 5 minutes. And so it's important for you to observe your sensitive kid. And if they fit anywhere in those categories, then you should definitely be tuning in, because your child is not exhibiting developmentally appropriate behavior. And that means that they're not only lagging behind, but they're also significantly stressed. Today we're going to cover your stress, right? And the challenges that you're having particularly, but make sure that you stay tuned. And if this is your first show, go ahead and watch or listen wherever you're following me here at this moment, for other components to this meltdown cycle, because there are many factors related to this. But today we're going to focus on the challenge you're having as a parent when you hear your spouse or co-parent focus on a smaller issue, like if your child is trying to hold it all in and be flexible in tolerating a new dinner option, but they say it in a way that isn't very kind. You might notice, oof, they're really working on it, but your spouse might say, don't talk to your mother like that. And when that happens, that can be really tricky for you as a parent. And obviously I'm picking a parent here. And so for you as a parent, hearing your spouse or co-parent give feedback to your kiddo when you're looking at a different angle and perhaps zooming out to your child's flexibility in that moment, the issue at hand can be really stressful for you, right? You could be stuck in trying to not set off the bomb and help your kid choose a different food for dinner that they're not used to. And you might be deciding that your priority in that moment isn't the language that they use to communicate that with you, but that they're flexible nonetheless. But if your spouse is focusing on the fact that they are respectful in the moment and having safe language, then you have a ticking time bomb on your hands, not only with your kid, in terms of trying to prevent the meltdown, but then also with your relationship with your spouse, right? And your own responsivity to that. It could be that you as parent are the one trying not to explode at your spouse. Man, why'd you have to point that out today? We were moving into kiddo trying broccoli for the first time. Geez. And so in that experience, obviously it can be not only stressful, but also can be difficult to navigate in terms of whether or not you as a parent are certain what you should be prioritizing in that moment. Should you be prioritizing both things, using respectful language and being flexible at the same time? Should you be focusing on the respectful language and then flexibility comes after that, right? I mean, either or could be a toss-up when you're trying to break out of the meltdown cycle without a system. And so not only are you trying to help your kids stay calm, but you're also trying to help yourself stay calm. And oftentimes this means that you're trying really hard not to give your spouse side eye or glare at them when they are trying to support your child in developing in an emotionally healthy way, but not doing it in a way that is in alignment with what's going on in your mind in that moment, okay? And so what that means is that you're holding down the fort in a lot of different ways. You're stifling your voice, you're likely trying to notice that your spouse or co-parent is saying things like, they have a right to parent their kid, and you're trying to manage, parental perspectives on what that actually looks like and what parenting principles in general, that your partner doesn't need your permission to have an assessment of your kid's behavior. And so all of this, in addition to that, your child is managing the stress and tension in the house because they see it on your face. When you're about to give your partner a look, then that mitigation, trying not to give your partner a look can also be noticed by your sensitive kid, because we know sensitive kids notice those subtleties, right? So in addition to that, we already know that your child is irritable because you're trying to help them grow in this circumstance, like I said, trying a new food for dinner, for example. But it might be just trying to get them out the door, right? And they're not using the most effective language. So either way, all of this can feel so tiring and draining in this experience. And so as a parent, it can feel very tricky to figure out what to prioritize and when. So you might have tried a few things to break out of this pattern, right? Might have wanted to give your spouse direct feedback in the moment. Hey, we're not focusing on respectful language right now. We're focusing on getting the kid to eat the dang broccoli. Or I'm just trying to get out the door. I don't care how he talks to me right now. And in that response, in that experience, what happens, right? Wanting to give direct feedback to your partner can undermine your partner's parenting authority, which can lead to a lot of frustration between the two of you in your relationship, in your marriage or your relationship. And in that respect, what it leads to is a disconnect between two people who are supposed to be sharing the in charge experience of running the household, right? And so obviously that can feel incredibly frustrating, but also leave you feeling alone on an island in parenting your sensitive kid. And so then the next thing you might have tried is to hold it all in, right? Well, maybe I shouldn't give feedback to my spouse at this point. Maybe I should just hang on to that feedback and see if it's a pattern and then eventually address it. But what does ignoring do, right? Ignoring always keeps you stuck in helplessness and powerlessness. And it also helps you end up being the emotional janitor, right, of your sensitive kid, where you're just sweeping up the meltdown after the fact, because if your spouse made a comment that threw your kid over the edge, when you were trying to help them, stretch out of their comfort zone in some other way, and then one more piece of feedback was just the straw that broke the camel's back. Here we have a situation where now you are the parent in charge in the moment, trying to work on whatever transition it is, trying to work on whatever priority, major, action you want your kid to be taking right now, whether that be get out the door, eat the broccoli. Like I said, you pick, do the homework, you pick the behavior, whatever it is that you're looking for in that moment. But what happens in that moment is the meltdown cycle arises, right? And so if you're the one in charge trying to get the broccoli eaten, trying to get out the door, trying to get the homework done, then it's likely you as a parent are the one left trying to still accomplish that task post meltdown. Okay. And so what happens is that you might be needing to support your child, and then it takes even longer, right? To do that. So then not only does the whining and complaining and frustration that your child is exhibiting in that moment take as long as it does, but then we have the meltdown cycle on top of it. So that means the frustration, the yelling, the kicking, the screaming, the quitting, and then the coaxing and the reassuring and the calming and the pacing and the maybe even quitting for you as a parent as well. And so now you have 20, 40, 60 minutes added to this timeline when all you're expecting to do is just finish dinner or, finish the 5-minute worksheet or whatever it is that your kiddo is expected to do in that moment or get out the door, which obviously, if you have any place that you need to be in a timely fashion, 60 minutes is a big gap. You could be missing the activity altogether. And so we're dealing with this in a multiple different ways, right? And lots of parents can be trying either of those things, or you could be trying number 3, which is I like to call Monday morning quarterbacking. I mean, I didn't make up that phrase, but if you're anywhere other than in the US, you might need some reference point of what I mean by that turn of phrase. But basically looking at the situation and trying to correct it in hindsight. And so what happens then when you're bringing that up at bedtime with your spouse or co-parent is that you're not able to take apart the entire incident because your memory is only as good as your memory can be when you're living in survival mode. And so that means that you're going to miss details, and it puts your spouse or co-parent on the defensive, right? Because you're seeing things from one angle and you wished it could have been handled differently. And if your spouse feels like your kid deserved to have the feedback that they needed in that moment, then you have an argument on your hands and you're trying to figure out whose priority is more important. Is it the parent who's looking at the bigger picture, or is it the parent who's looking at, how we do one thing is how we do everything? And if your child is speaking to you in a disrespectful way, then your child needs that feedback immediately so that pattern doesn't continue. And so when we think about these challenges and these two seemingly opposing ideas, it can be extremely frustrating for you and draining. And the other option is that maybe you do collaborate and you do come up with a different way to talk to each other or a different way to give each other that teamwork approach in the moment when your kiddo is struggling. But this is all you end up talking about, right? And we've heard so many parents over the years, we've helped at this point over 350 families break out of that meltdown cycle. And over the years, we've spoken to way more families than that who have decided either not to work with us or who weren't a fit. And one of the challenges that is incredibly important that we see for families who are stuck in this cycle is that this can be all consuming. I mean, you can go to date night and spend the whole time talking about your sensitive kid, not have any idea what your spouse is doing at work, not have any idea about your spouse's hopes and dreams, let alone even think about dreaming or hoping with your family at all. Because when you're stuck in this survival mode component, all you can think about is tunnel vision. How do I make tomorrow better? And tomorrow is as far ahead as you can look oftentimes, right? And so when we think about being able to break out of this pattern and look globally for your child's development and think long term, it poses a bigger issue for you. You can end up thinking that eventually it'll figure its way out. It'll shake itself out. But the question at this point becomes how. Right? What is liberating in this experience? How do you break out of this pattern on a consistent basis? Because the experience you're having right now is draining. You're either passing out at the end of the night, just wiped out, not, can't talk about anything more, and frustrated, feeling either frustrated with your child, frustrated with how you handle the situation, or frustrated with your spouse, or all three, or feeling aggravated in the sense that that the small things, the nitpicking, is also something that you're doing, but only to your spouse instead of to your kid. And so then obviously looking at it from a situation where the entire family is stuck in this pattern of just keeping a negativity ledger and just paying attention to all the things that just aren't working in the household. And so when we think about that pattern that parents are in, we identify with our clients consistently that this is a symptom of the meltdown cycle. And it's important for you to notice that this problem is pervasive. The problem is not just whether or not your kid will eat broccoli. It's not just whether or not your kid will wear socks to school under their boots. It is not just whether or not your child will do their homework on a regular basis or wants to go to school regularly. The challenge is going on every single day, every hour of the day, if your child is having meltdowns on a daily basis. And that's part of the general mission of MTC is to help you guys understand as parents how big a problem this really is. Because many parents stuck in this pattern will try to look at it from a smaller perspective. And that keeps you stuck actually in reactive mode, because most professionals will start to support you in a reactive way, helping you break out of the pattern by just looking at the problem of the week. So the problem of the week might very well be that you are stressed and trying to get your kid to eat broccoli because that was when the biggest meltdown happened. But honestly, your child's ability to manage stress and challenge it doesn't matter whether you're serving them broccoli or you're asking them to do homework. It's all the same problem. Your child needs the capacity to break out of the pattern of feeling like challenge is impossible. And that important component that they perceive for themselves is tackled in multiple different ways. And it's not something that you can tackle just by piecemeal thinking about it from a certain circumstance. You need to be able to teach your son or daughter or children to break out of this pattern in a more principled way. They need to be able to believe at their whole heart that they are capable of trying their best and learning how to make their best even better. And that experience is not something that you as a parent of a sensitive kid can just teach them in the context of broccoli or teach them in the context of homework. You have to teach them that all day long in different ways. Now, obviously, we're talking about making this simpler for you. That's what MTC's been able to do. Simplify it down to solve the problem and eliminate that meltdown cycle in as little as 8 weeks. That sounds pretty simple to me, right? Especially if you've been dealing with this for a heck of a lot longer than the 2 months it takes to turn most family dynamics around. Now, with that being said, doesn't mean that it's going to be easy. It's very hard work, and so is staying stuck in the meltdown cycle. So let's look at what actually is liberating, right? Because if you have a plan, if you know what breaks out of the cycle, then it's a heck of a lot easier to actually do it when you know not only it's going to work for you, but also whether or not the plan is applicable to your particular family. So what we know for sure is that there are 4 main components to fixing the problem, and breaking this pattern for parents of sensitive kids. first happens in your ability to think about problems differently. When you're stuck in the meltdown cycle and you're in survival mode, you are in reactive mode. That is something that will happen over and over and over again. And it is not something that just learning about the fight flight response is going to break you out of either, right? Because again, just noticing when you're in fight or flight is a reactive process in and of itself. So it's important for you to get out ahead of it, start to think differently about how your child is gauging their challenges, and start to look at your child's challenges from a place of having a struggle in generalizing their skills rather than in building skills from scratch or in demonstrating a skill and then being able to repeat it. And this is important because when you're parenting a sensitive kid, you can't teach a kid to generalize a skill by focusing on teaching in a narrow experience. Okay, you have to teach them to generalize the skill in all avenues of their life. So if your child is only capable of managing their emotional state in, say, for example, the school setting, I want you to take a pretty clear look at what that actually means, because managing an emotional state does not mean holding your ish together. All right, if you're boiling inside and you're able to put on a happy face, that's people pleasing. That's not emotional management. And so it's really important and that's emotional stuffing, which will show up later as an explosion, right? Because a boiled pot with a lid on it still boils over. So when we think about the experience of sensitive kids and how sensitive kids are often demonstrating that they are not actually generalizing their skills, they are just people pleasing in certain circumstances, and then exploding or imploding in others, then it's clear for you as a parent to notice how big of a problem this is. So when both of you are on the same page as parents, if you're parenting in a pair, then it totally changes the game. So when we think about what's important for parenting a sensitive kid, it is imperative for both parents to understand the challenge. And if both parents have any contact with sensitive child and raising them, then it's critical that that's the first step that you focus on. That both of you understand this is a problem that has urgency and it's a problem that needs to be fixed now. Because if people-pleasing workaholism is your kid's best fit scenario, we got to look at the other side of this, okay? You've heard me speak about perfectionism and where that lands. And if you haven't, go ahead and check out my other previous shows about it. Perfectionism at its worst leads to suicidal thoughts, not being good enough, not feeling capable of that, and I've done a whole long trainings on that. So I'm not going to spend the time today to talk about it. And it's also true that I'm not here to just say that isn't a very clear, relevant experience for sensitive people, because it is. You hear sensitive people all over the internet who feel misunderstood. And when you feel misunderstood, you feel isolated, and isolation is a symptom of depression. And so when you add stress to that, or you add disconnection and an inability to feel focused at work, or an inability to feel accomplished at work because it's so overwhelming because you don't have emotion regulation skills, that's a perfect storm. And that's where it leads to in terms of the isolating depression that then leads to suicidal thoughts. This is pure and simple math here when we think about adding symptoms together and then looking at the odds. So it's not speculation. There's plenty of research, and you can go ahead and listen to my other talks on myth-busting suicide and the perception of how frequently suicide happens for isolated teens. This is a specialty of mine, and it's something that we've been working on in our private practice for years and years. And so when you think about being able to hear experts turn that around and how we do that for sensitive teens who are actually actively suicidal, pay attention. This is an experience that I have and an expertise that I have. So not here to just tell you that that because I'm pulling it out of thin air. So when we think about the important piece of how that snowball goes all the way down the hill, you're raising an 8, 9, 10-year-old, you need to understand there's a tipping point, and that tipping point can be when your kid is 11. It's not when your kid is 14. It's not when your kid is 17, all right? This is incredibly important. Highly sensitive kids who are struggling with perfectionism start to exhibit feelings like life would be better off without them, or that there's no point to living, and giving up becomes a consistent pattern of theirs. If that's something that you're dealing with when your child is 8 and 9, then you need to be focusing on that now, because the giving up pattern doesn't magically disappear when you add hormones to the mix, and you add frustration, right? And especially if you have both parents who are not on the same page, we have to observe that comes first. You both need to see how your child is capable. Because if you don't think your child is capable, then your kid, who already thinks that they are not capable, will not believe you when you tell them that they are, right? I mean, that's just, 1 + 1 = 2. Again, here's simple math. So let's focus on breaking out of that pattern, okay? Both of you, both parents need to understand that, that this is critically important. That when you're raising a child in a 2-parent household, both parents need to be on the same page. Now, what do I mean by that? I mean, you both need to be paying attention to the fact that you do not want your kids' worst case scenario to be that they're people-pleasing workaholics. You also don't want your kids' best case scenario to be that they're people-pleasing workaholics. And I would invite you to observe how the highly sensitive people that you know in adulthood are living their lives. Because when we work with families where parents are coming to us, many of them are highly sensitive, and many of them are identifying as people-pleasing workaholics. They are tired, they are drained, they are frustrated in their lives. And it's also true that they're parenting kids stuck in the meltdown cycle. So this is not something that I'm just, like I said, just sharing with you based on a small data set. Okay, 350 families, and the majority of those parents, at least one of them is highly sensitive, because the odds, being highly sensitive personality trait, there's some genetics involved here. It's important to understand that we know exactly how to help highly sensitive adults break out of the pattern of indecision, of feeling like they don't know how to make effective decisions without being told what to do, etc. In addition to breaking out of the meltdown cycle. So all these things are related. So let's cover this, okay? So you need to both understand what it takes to not raise a millennial who's going to stick in your basement, all right? And I know we've moved out of that the generation, in the sense that we have, the kids that we're raising now are in a different generation. But we all know what a millennial in the basement looks like, right? And that was a huge issue with that generation. Kids who just were consistently enabled at home. Parents did not have the ability to support their sensitive kids in breaking out of a pattern of believing that they weren't good enough. If they didn't get things that they wanted to or didn't achieve things that they wanted to, then they quit pretty quickly. And that led to a lot of parents with a failure to launch issue with their young adult children. And we saw how that affected the workforce. It's still affecting the workforce today, because being an employer myself, witnessing people who have come out of the workforce with master's degrees, etc. The millennials who are hireable are the ones who aren't people pleasing, who aren't workaholics, and it's also true that they're not ones who quit early, right? And that's really important. And so when we think about being able to break out of that pattern, there are a lot of factors to that, and you both need to observe what starts that pattern in the first place. And that is not only enabling and rescuing your sensitive kid from their big emotions, but also stifling them and telling them that they need to suck it up, okay? Those two patterns are really, really important for you to observe and to break out of. So the next piece that we're going to talk about is being able to support your kids in building the strength, the capacity to feel like they can handle challenge, right? And you can't do that by just, telling them to put up or shut up, asserting your authority as a parent. And you also can't do that by walking on eggshells, and saying that life is going to work itself out and shake itself out. Highly sensitive kids struggle to generalize skills, and that means that they need direct and specific instruction on how to build skills. You can't just wait for your kid to mature out of this, okay? Personality trait isn't something you mature out of. Think about it. If you're an introvert and you never stretch outside your comfort zone, you will eventually become a hermit. And that's because the experience of being introverted and I'm an introvert myself, so I'm not saying that there's anything necessarily wrong with it, or that you have that there's a flaw in the personality trait. But introverts need to have friends, right? Introverts need to communicate with other people. Introverts need to reach out, need to have communication skills. Okay, so if you're a highly sensitive kid and you don't have those communication skills, you don't know how to reach out to seek support, you don't know how to trust that other people have your best interests at hand and that they can help you even when you don't know how to ask all the way the first time, right? Ask in an effective way the first time, but you can be persistent and know that the people will eventually help you if you figure out how to ask in an effective way. Then if you don't have those skills, then you're going to stop trusting people. If you stop trusting people, you're going to feel more comfortable by yourself, for better or worse, right? You might feel more comfortable because you've given up trying. Same thing for extroverts. Okay, extroverts also need the ability to slow down, to experience the world in a way that isn't always necessarily go, go, go with a lot of social engagement. Okay, otherwise you're going to hook up with different people just because you can't be alone, right? So those are two personality traits. Okay, 70% of highly sensitive people are introverted, which means 30% are extroverted. So I'm not describing the same thing, but what I'm trying to do is give you the example of people with personality traits also have to balance themselves out in that respect. Same thing for sensitive people, okay? You can't just experience your sensitivities and not look at stretching outside of that comfort zone. So enabling your sensitive kid by saying, oh my gosh, this light is so bright for you, let's just never go to the mall, is not going to solve the problem. Or Target, or you know what I mean, like any major department store where they shut down the windows. So you stay in there longer, right? We all understand psychology, retail psychology. So there's important pieces that people need to be able to tolerate. And bright lights can happen on the screens too. So just shopping online isn't going to solve the problem of never going into Target. You might need to get something that needs to be in your house in the next 20 minutes. So you're going to need to be able to tolerate those bright lights, right? In some way, shape, or form. And so it's important to not be in this all or nothing, you can't handle it, therefore I won't teach you how to handle it experience, or you can handle it. I don't trust that you're telling me you can't handle it, so I'm just going to make you handle it by stuffing any belief that you have that you can't handle it and not listening to you, right? So neither of those approaches work, and it's incredibly important for your kid to receive direct and specific feedback on their behavior without criticizing them, without telling them that they're wrong for it, without telling them that they should have known it better, or that they showed it to you in one avenue of life, so why can't they show it to you in another avenue of life? That's not up to your child to learn about themselves. Children build insight about how they feel about a situation, not about how or why they do a certain thing a certain way. That level of abstract thought isn't even available for development until the child starts to move into adolescence. And so when we think about having kids psychoanalyze themselves, why do you do it like this? Why are you talking like this? The answer, I don't know, is perfect, because you're asking a kid to think like they're 25, 30 when they're 6 or when they're 14, okay? So another reason why talk therapy doesn't work, because highly sensitive kids, while they can be very wise, they can speculate, they're also likely to speculate in a way that they think an adult is going to help, is going to receive it well, because, hence the whole pattern of people pleasing. So we think about what actually relates to change. You as a parent need to lead your child out of this pattern. You as a parent need to be playful and engaging and caring in a way that helps your sensitive kid feel understood, okay? Now, I'm not saying that you don't care about your kid. You wouldn't be raising them if you didn't. But the approach that you're sending to your kid and how you're trying to raise them actually leads your child to think that you don't care. Hence the reason why we hear many kids say, you don't love me. If you loved me, you wouldn't do this. I hate you. You hate me, etc. So these are all symptoms, again, of the meltdown cycle. And so it's important for you to notice that as much as you do care, if you're using an ineffective strategy to get out of this pattern, your child is going to second guess that. Your child is going to have a hard time believing that they are lovable. And that, unfortunately, isn't something that you can necessarily convince your kid to feel otherwise. Your actions have to demonstrate that. Your words aren't as powerful as your actions. And so when we think about being able to make that commitment to break out of this pattern, you need to take strong and significant action yourself. Changing the entire strategy rather than just picking tactics to switch is incredibly important in breaking out of that pattern. You got to be focusing, like I said, in how you as a parent are viewing the whole situation. That's a mindset thing, but it's also a perspective shift, a paradigm shift for many parents. The next thing is observing how to do this playfully. Communicate through your child's language, which is play. Okay, we can't just be cracking jokes and making fun of the situation. That's not what I mean by playful. Excuse me, getting over a cold. What I mean is the ability for you and your child to communicate in a way that helps your child feel like they can relax in the conversation. Okay, and that's not going to work if you're just poking fun or mocking or any sort of cracking jokes component. That's not the playfulness we're talking about here. And then the next thing is being able to communicate in a way that helps your child feel like they can handle this challenge in bite-sized pieces, and that requires a lot of perspective, and quite frankly, expert perspective on what to prioritize. Maybe for your particular child, it is to prioritize how they ask the question with kindness and respectful language. And some other children, it is whether or not they're getting the action done, right? And this just depends on the child, and the approach is dependent on your family. So how do we know what we do is going to work for your particular family? I don't. I have to have a conversation with you, or my team has to have a conversation with you, because there are a multitude of factors that play into the meltdown cycle, as well as play into how a parent is perpetuating the meltdown cycle in the family dynamic. And as parents, you need to be able to not only observe that, but also be willing to be the catalyst for change in your family. And there can be environmental circumstances that could keep this pattern going, that makes the work that we here at MTC do long, slow, and ineffective, which means we wouldn't invite you to work with us because it just doesn't make sense. And given the circumstances, a more appropriate approach might be therapy, or reading on your own, changing some things on your own. Or just a pretty clear assessment of whether or not your kid's behavior is actually developmentally appropriate or not. And we're happy to have that conversation with you, okay? But if you're ready to break out of this pattern, I encourage you to book that call with our team, because you have the ability to observe exactly what can change it, and you have the ability to make that decision now and to fix it now. The whole dynamic needs to be shifted, and that requires some pretty significant work on your end as a parent. And you need to be ready to do that work. And if you are, let's have a conversation. We're excited to talk to you and see whether or not we'd be a fit to turn that around with you. And if we're not, like I said, we would tell you exactly what would be the next steps that you need to take to change the dynamic you have in your family, because no parent, no child, no family member was put on this earth to be miserable. And so if you guys are stuck in this painful experience, it's time to break out of it. There's no more time than now to give to this, to thinking about this issue. It's time to act. All right. So go ahead over to meganthompsoncoaching.com/talk or meganthompsoncoaching.com/teen talk